Bear from Obsession can learn a thing or two about romance from Peter Parker. What's going on, gang? It's me, Charles C. Poe. Welcome to WILIscredia. Today we're talking about Spider-Man Brand New Day. And any of you who know me know I have superhero comic book fatigue. So is it a brand new day? I went into this movie with my expectations somewhere pretty low, surface level, if not below sea level. I don't have superhero fatigue so much as I have a superhero coma, but still went and saw this day one. So what does that tell you about whatever is I'm doing? I think part of it has to do with all of the shows and things going on. You have to really do homework to keep up with all of the movies that come out. And for a while, since COVID at least, it feels like there's about 4 movies a year and a corresponding 4 television series that you need to be intertwined with to do that homework. And I've just stopped. I'll see the big stuff and I don't know, I'll miss out on some things. But, this is a big deal. It is Spider-Man. I guess cautiously optimistic is what I would say I was going into this. And ironically, because of my fatigue, the first 2/3 of this movie really work for me. Something that surprises me about this movie is that it's very down to earth. It's a very contained story. It's a very New York centric story. And I'm kind of okay with that. Trying to one up the previous thing and do more multiverse stuff, you can only spin yourself into a knot there. And I'm kind of glad that, if anything, as far as the spectacle has kind of been toned down, and I'm here for it, believe it or not. So the movie feels like a New York City contained crime thriller, and I'm absolutely fine with that. Don't get me wrong, there's certainly superhero characters running around. You have the Scorpion character, you have the Punisher, and a slew of others that I'll get into later. But it's definitely a comic book movie. But the thing about this go-round, the thing about Brand New Day is they're characters within a universe who are just doing New York stuff. They're not, gods trying to strike each other down with lightning and stuff. Although we do have a Hulk sighting, and that's probably the biggest superhero thing happening that isn't psychological. And I kind of prefer that. You can't keep on one-upping on the Avengers. So for the first 90 minutes or so, I was really about what this movie was setting up. Spider-Man plays best to me when he's doing street level stuff, saving an old lady, getting her purse back, doing friendly neighborhood Spider-Man stuff. And for the most part, this movie does do that in the first half. Scorpion isn't a universe-ending threat. It's more of a contained issue for New York that Spider-Man and the Punisher can handle. And the Punisher, I was concerned about how that character would fit, and they find a way to maneuver around the R-rated nature of the Punisher here, and it's fine for me. I was actually quite surprised at how much I enjoyed having the Punisher and this version of Spider-Man together. It's odd that you have the Bruce Banner character, the Incredible Hulk, and he's not being used as this piece, this cog in the wheel, although he's important for a certain spectacle in the movie, and he plays into it, but he's kind of barely in the movie. And that's awesome. You have this great, giant, typical superhero character, and it's more of a also-ran in this movie, and I actually appreciate that. But my problem with movies like this has been the lack of meaningful stakes. You watch these superhero movies, and you just know that certain characters just aren't going to die. There's not going to be some sort of meaningful sacrifice, and not since Avengers Endgame did I really get wowed by something. But they do find a way to have characters show down and have it feel both meaningful and have stakes with an asterisk that, there's characters that aren't really going to go anywhere, but at least for the sake of the ride, it made sense in this story. But the difference here is the film prior to this, some of the consequences of the previous film, they do stick. And it's not something that, okay, the second this movie starts, all the things that we wished for and the circumstances of the previous film, they're wiped away magically. Here's, we're doing it all over again. The consequences from the previous movie do stick, and they carry throughout the movie, and that's a refreshing thing for me to see, at least. The film allows the consequences of No Way Home to linger. Peter Parker's friends still don't know who he is. The relationships that once were the glue, the friendships that defined his youth, his high school years, they're no longer there. They're essentially disappeared, although we do come across those characters in this movie, and he's kind of forced to navigate the loneliness of circumstances from the previous movie as well as circumstances of that movie moving forward. And it's a nice step forward for me without having to wipe everything clean. And to me, I found that way more compelling than any of the action set pieces, and I was kind of all on board with the New York City crimey stuff. Also, by the way, Peter Parker and what he is as Spider-Man, dealing with people important to him not knowing who he is. Watching Peter operate in a world that does not know who Peter is, it's effective for me, and I appreciated the effort and the first 90 minutes or so of this movie. It carries an emotional weight, especially with the character. I really enjoyed Tom Holland in this movie way more than I did in The Odyssey, so whatever the hell that means, take that for what it's worth. With that said, and Tom Holland's character, I kept making a very, I don't know, maybe it's just a specifically me comparison, but I could not help it. 2026 appears to be the year of people being possessed and people doing things that they don't really have their autonomy in doing. It's a very obsession summer for me. I know I could be doing my own headcanon, but just go with me for a second. Once again, we have a protagonist who's emotionally invested in someone who does not feel the same way in return, because MJ does not remember who Peter is. So we have some sort of obstacle there for Peter, who's in love with a character who does not love him back. Very obsession-y. But the central conflict of this movie also revolves around someone possessing people to do things that they don't have autonomy with. They're very different films, don't get me wrong, but very similar in a lot of ways too. And I couldn't help but think, oh, I wonder if people are going to say that Peter Parker is the villain here. Or I guess that wouldn't track here, because he's not. He did the right thing, or at least in comparison. I really like the aspect, and it could just be residue from really enjoying Obsession this year, but there's connective tissue there. The mind control aspect creates an interesting question ethically that maybe Obsession doesn't cover, and it gives us a believable excuse to have the Hulk and Spider-Man square down. Not really giving a spoiler, it's in the trailer. Rather than forcing this fight because, well, the trailer needed a money shot, it's actually justified in the narrative because, well, some people in the movie don't have control over what they're doing. They're kind of passengers to what's going on in their vessel. It's a good enough reason for me to see those two characters clash. Again, I'm really shocked at how much on board with it I was. For the first 90 to 100 minutes of this movie, I was genuinely having a good time. There's a scene where characters are in a living room just kind of bonding, and I thought to myself, this is a great way to close this movie out. And as I looked at my watch, I realized there's about half an hour left in this movie, if not more. This is where things kind of get a little sloppy, full, overstuffed. And that's kind of where the movie starts losing me here. The third act almost feels like it's an entirely different movie. It's its own sequel. Everything about the contained nature of this little New York City story is outdone in this third act with so many experiences, so many characters. It really gets overstuffed, and a short time frame too. Suddenly in the third act, everything becomes bigger, louder, and significantly more crowded. The grounded crime story starts giving way to a far more traditional superhero climax. Ironically, it's where it kind of loses me. As far as I'm concerned, it loses so much of what that opening 90-minute stretch made so refreshing. With that, it's a bit of a consistency issue that I have problems with. You have a moment in the film where Spider-Man shows down with the Hulk, and he just gets absolutely demolished by him. Yet not long after that experience, I think that's like the halfway mark where Spider-Man and Hulk square down, he's kind of holding his own against people who are possessed and multiple members of the Hand who are, outnumbering him, and he's holding his own quite a bit. He couldn't handle one Hulk, but he could handle a baker's dozen of these red ninjas. And that I kind of felt, disappointed in. I know we're dealing with like comic book logic, But it's moments like that that make me, it makes it difficult for me to just get excited about stuff and, let all of the voices in the back of my head quiet down. I start second guessing things. It makes it hard for me to judge and figure out just how capable Peter or Spider-Man is from scene to scene, especially like when you're gauging the threat level of some of these things. Because in the third act, you have your big bad, I thought, and it just kind of gets a little overstuffed and a little less than believable for me. And the biggest criticism I could give to the climax of this movie is during the climax, I was checking my watch. This is never when you want an audience's attention to drift during the climax. But again, fatigue, I was into the different story, the contained crime thing. When it became a comic book movie, I really kind of started twiddling my fingers. But with that said, the opening hour and a half earned so much goodwill that I wanted to stay invested. But the escalating spectacle eventually became exhausting, much less exciting. But even with those issues, I can't ignore just how much I really enjoyed the first 90 minutes or hour and 45 minutes or so. So with that said, for a movie that I expected very little from, this surprised me way more than I expected it to, and I kind of enjoyed it. For me, Spider-Man Brand New Day is a 4 out of 5. If you chop off that last half an hour, could be a 4.5, 5 out of me. The final act is the most questionable part for me, and I don't know what that says. But the grounded, emotional storytelling in that first 2/3 was more than enough to carry my experience for this movie. I guess I could have left at the time that I felt like the story was nice and over. But I'm going to get into spoilers, so this is your warning to bail right now. Let me know down below how you felt about the movie. Am I just being a cranky anti-comic book kid? Because that's certainly possible. But what were your thoughts? Spoilers, 3, 2, 1. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. There's a ton of characters in this movie, and one of the issues that I recall quite heavily about people complaining about The Dark Knight is there's too many villains, there's too many characters going on. With that thought of, I don't entirely disagree with that, but I had to take note of the people that are introduced in this movie. You have the Punisher. Technically, you have the Hulk for the first time. You have the Red Ninjas, otherwise known as the Hand. You have Jean Grey. You have this protective force. I forgot their name. You have Scorpion, of course. And on top of all of those brand new characters, did I say Black Widow? Black Widow also. On top of all of those relatively new characters to this franchise, you have the carryover from the first movie, which is Peter Parker in this new friend zone situation, and his dealing with May not being with us anymore, and a bunch of other things that the Peter Parker storyline was fine on its own. And you're stacking so much extra shit that I won't lie, the first hour and a half, I was kind of shocked at how much they were able to intertwine these characters and have them feel like little pieces of this crime thriller that takes place in New York. But by the third act, the overstuffed nature just got way too overstuffed. Some of them could be considered supporting characters, but for some of these characters, as far as Spider-Man's concerned, as far as this universe is concerned, you've got to explain some of these things. I'm sorry, I have not watched the television series for The Punisher. It's not completely egregious, but there are some things you've got to set this story up. And there's so many brand new characters here that it feels just overstuffed. It feels like at least 2 movies worth of introductions and storyline in what was a 215 hour long movie. It's hysterical because on paper, I think this central idea is excellent. This looming presence of Jean Grey and her capabilities. This isn't the first time we've seen someone with this capability, although this is the first time we get Jean Grey in the modern incarnation of the post-Avengers world. Scarlet Witch, whatever the hell her name is. I did watch that series. But these people that can do things with their mind. Interesting thing. I was more intrigued with, oh, what does this mean for X-Men moving forward? I couldn't help but do like the external thought process, like, oh, all right, what does this mean now? But her controlling people, being this morally gray character that is kind of bad, kind of good, controlling people to do things. Like I said, it gives you this element of stakes that you don't normally get from comic book movies, and I'm here for it. But in small doses. If getting Jean Grey in here is what we need to see a Spider-Man versus the Hulk, cool. And to have both of them have some sort of struggle. Seeing the Hulk struggle with, did I hurt anyone after he comes to? That was cool. You have two people that, much like Civil War, two characters that are just kind of squaring off that you don't know who to root for, although it's a Spider-Man movie, so there's that. And I think, you know what, maybe we don't need a Universal Hulk movie because Hulk has been fine in his cameos in these other movies, so for whatever that's worth, yeah, keep holding on, Universal. But again, as far as all of the new characters for this franchise, for this movie is concerned, the Jean Grey introduction was fascinating. You could have had the entire movie just be Jean Grey as the big bad, which technically she is, but this little watch group thing and the hand, Jean Grey controlling the Hulk is kind of more than enough for an entire movie. And having the Punisher be the third man or the fourth man, that feels like enough to me. But having so much extra like backstory for Jean Grey's character and backstory for what's going on with the hand, the red ninjas, and oh, by the way, scorpions in the beginning of this movie, it's too much. It's just too much. I realize that there's a ton of fans that too much of a good thing is you can't have enough of a good thing. So I take all of this with a grain of salt, but I would like to sit with like a story, just do a story well enough and carry it through. All of these new bells and whistles to add to the story, it was frustrating, and most especially in the third act. And the problem is, for the first hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, the movie feels contained even with extra characters coming in. But the last third, the last act, it just refuses to focus. There's so much going on here. And again, when you get me second guessing things that I'm being a stubborn shit about, you have Spider-Man who in the third act, he's in the hospital and all of New York is rooting for him. I couldn't help but think this is the same New York that the events of the Avengers and the Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, all of this shit happened in the same New York, as well as a bunch of other events in this universe. They're familiar with characters dying and being hurt. You would kind of expect characters to be hurt. It's not too big a deal. It's just something that, I don't know, when you start doing these things and telling us, the audience, that, oh, the people in this world have a very short memory, I kind of get disinterested. It's not a glaring problem for me, but in the third act, I think I was more bothered by anything because I was ready to go. And individually, a bunch of these ideas aren't bad, but the combination of all of them and squishing all of them together in that third act is so exhausting. And for someone who has comic fatigue, it really makes me want to check out. And I kind of did a little bit. I was second guessing things that were happening in the movie. Like I said, I was ready for the story to be over. I was more than pleased with the emotional heart of this movie being Peter Parker coming to grips with the fact that he no longer has May. He no longer has his friends. He loves a character that does not know who he is. That's more than enough, at least more than enough for a 90-minute movie for me. I don't know if you had to add so much extra to this, why make it a 2.5-hour movie? You have a perfectly good hour and 45 minutes there. That Peter Parker storyline is great. It's fine. You could even sprinkle in the Jean Grey stuff in there and have that be like a looming threat and more of a second half thing. But the hand, Scorpion in the beginning, having to meet Black Widow, like I've lost track of some of the things. I forgot the name of the group, of the watchdog group. There's so much shit that happened in there where it's like I shouldn't forget the name of the group that is keeping Jean Grey at the end of the movie. The main storyline about Peter Parker was more than enough for me. And by the end, it felt like there was 6 characters competing for 7 storylines. And It's wild. If I were to judge only the third act, it would be a kind of a brutal score. It says so much about the first half of the movie, the first 2/3 of the movie, that I gave this movie a 4 out of 5 because I really enjoyed that first 90 minutes or so. The third act gets so messy for me. It doesn't feel like a contained story so much as it does, Marvel, in their handshake deal for Spider-Man, they've got to have this be a branching off point to connect to a bunch of other things. And ta-da, we've got Avengers coming up soon. So let's make sure we set up all of these future projects for Marvel, never mind Spider-Man. So with the third act of the movie, Jean Grey is a hell of a villain. Again, we've had some sort of tease. We've had some version of this even in films. Villain in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, we have some sort of familiarity with this, but Jean Grey, from what I remember of the X-Men movies, kind of a badass character. We have a bunch of characters in the Marvel universe, and if Marvel is bringing back Professor X and stuff and Magneto, there's a bunch of these characters that could really introduce stakes that I would like to see. I would like to see characters that I feel like I don't know if they're going to make it. And that needs to be a thing more often. Or for the stakes and the circumstances to affect characters for at least a couple of movies. It feels like this movie really wanted to tie up the knots with Peter Parker and his friends. They didn't waste it too much. I was actually kind of shocked with the dynamic between MJ and Peter Parker and him her reading his note there and her not returning the favor. It's wild to be like, oh, this is how obsession should have went. But I like stuff like that. I like, repercussions for actions and things to feel like, oh, I'm a superhero, so that's the way things are. But in the third act, Spider-Man just outright felt like Superman at points where he could hear what people are thinking, and his DNA was super. I don't recall that being the Spider-Man thing. It really felt like Sony was trying to do their best version of Superman, and that's just, I liked it when it was just a dude shooting webs and swinging around in between the city. In the third act of this movie, it tried to be a much bigger thing than it was, and let Jean Grey be the OP. So with all of that, I think the third act is undeniably overstuffed. If you're a comic kid, you might be all about it. So keep in mind, I'm really kind of tired. I'm not interested in watching the 50 hours of television series and extra movies to kind of keep track. So there's probably some things that could be easily explained for me. But if you're just judging this movie on the film that's presented in front of you, the third act is sloppy, busy, very overstuffed. But I really, really enjoyed that first half. If anything, it left me cautiously optimistic. And Marvel, they did their job. It gets me looking forward. What is the Jean Grey character going forward? And knowing, from the trailer of Doomsday, a couple of the characters that are in this movie are in that movie. So what does that mean moving forward? Once again, 4 out of 5 from me. Please click like and subscribe. Let me know down below how you felt. Am I being a grouch, or do you comic fans feel a little different than I do? I've been Charles. You haven't. Have a day.